I'm Michael Klam, host of Conversations with Poets. I've got Rudy Francisco with me today. We are in the San Diego Public Library downtown, and we want to give a shout out to everybody here, the folks behind the scenes, Sherwood, Kent. We got to give a shout out to Mark Cherry and Misty as well for all of the support and giving us a home. We're going to be filming with Rudy Francisco right next to the city, and when we were thinking about bringing you in, Rudy, we figured this would be the perfect place because I think for a lot of people, when they think Rudy Francisco, they think San Diego poetry, and when people think San Diego poetry, they think Rudy Francisco for sure. So we wanted to get you in here right next to the city. We got Logan to the south, we got the city proper over there, and we got the Bay and Coronado right there. On that side, we're headed off to North Park and East County, so we're right here, right in the middle. All right, so Rudy Francisco, tell us a little bit of history. You probably get this question all the time, but will you tell us a little about your history and specifically about San Diego and how close it is to your heart?
Yeah, so born and raised in San Diego. My father was military, he was a Marine, so he was stationed at Camp Pendleton. And then, you know, my mother, she came over. Both my parents are from Belize, by the way. So, when my father got stationed here, my mother, you know, came as well. And I was born here in San Diego, and I've never left, you know. And you know, I didn't get into poetry until much later, you know, I was about 17 when I wrote my first poem. And then I went off to college, you know, started writing a little bit more, found HBO Deaf Poetry randomly, and I was like, wow, this is amazing, because I had never seen people perform out loud before. So I started writing a little bit more. I became a resident advisor. I had to put on programs, right? Because as an RA, you got to put on programs for your students, right? So I went to my resident director. I was like, hey, I have no idea what to do. And he was like, so like, what do you like to do? And I told him I like writing poetry. And he was like, well, why don't you host maybe like a poetry reading for the students? So I was like, okay, like I could try that. And the first one that we hosted, it was the biggest program at our school. You know, around that time we were having a lot of trouble getting students to come out to programs. A lot of them just weren't very well attended. But the open mic, like so many people showed up. And then people from around the city started showing up as well. Then I started hearing about other open mics that were, you know, in North Park and whatnot. Then I started going to those, started meeting a lot of people, you know, met Anthony Blackshear, Viet Mai, Kendrick Dial, Christopher Wilson. And just having that group of people who also really love the art and, you know, were willing to encourage me, you know, and also challenge me. Because, you know, of those people, you know, Kendrick was also a performer, Anthony Blackshear also a performer, Viet Mai also a performer. You know, Christopher Wilson wrote poetry, but he didn't perform very often. But like, having that group of people really around me, that was one of the driving forces that really helped me, you know, get better at this craft. And, you know, since then, you know, I've gotten a lot of opportunities. And this is actually like what I do full time now. Like I travel around the country and around the world performing, and like I really just try to be an example for the craft, try to represent my city well, and really just try to push myself as an artist.
So you went from open readings to slam. Did you feel a certain way, one way or the other, about competition?
Oh yeah, definitely. So when I first heard about Poetry Slam, because I started doing open mics and I was just doing open mics. And then I heard about Poetry Slam because at that time, Valsalta used to host a slam on, I want to say it was like...
Was it 13th? Is that right?
Yeah, it was on Mondays. I want to say it was like, it was twice a month. I want to say it was like maybe second and fourth Monday or first and third Mondays. I forget which one it was. But I heard about it and I was like, it's a competition? And he was like, yeah. You know, and I was like, so that... like people are giving you like scores? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, what? I was like, that sounds weird, you know what I mean? Yeah. And at that time, since I was a resident advisor, I would have duty on Mondays typically, so I wasn't able to go for about a year. And then, you know, one day I was like, I just happened to be off, and I was like, oh, it's a slam night. Let me go, right? And I went, and I was like, should I sign up? And I was like, I'm gonna sign up, because I'm naturally competitive. I grew up playing sports, right? So I'm just naturally competitive. So like when I hear competition, no matter what it is, like I kind of want to be involved, So I signed up and I competed that night and I took second. Anthony Blackshear beat me. Yeah, right. My first slam, he beats me. He beats me pretty badly too, right? And then I was like, I like this, and initially, I didn't think that I would because, like I said, it seemed like a very odd concept, right? But what I realized is that your scores aren't necessarily reflective of how good your work is, right? It's how well you reached those 5 people who have scorecards, What I noticed is that, a poem can get a perfect score on one night. You could do the exact same poem the exact same way the following night and get, 3s and 5s, So yeah, it was an interesting adaptation for me. But once I started doing slam, I actually stopped playing basketball because I didn't feel the need to anymore. I felt like all of like my competitive energy was immersed in slam. So yeah, like even though it started off as like a weird concept, I adapted to it and I ended up really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, Ant Black is here right now, as you know. I could tell. I looked over to him when you said he beat you. Oh my God, the happiness and joy in the room in that moment, I'll tell you.
Oh, yeah.
But it must have been the competitive side of you to go and to get second and up against Ant, who's a phenomenal poet and performer. I mean, maybe that was part of your drive, You wanted to win, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me a little more about slam as a game. So it is, right?
Oh, absolutely.
When you're, do you have a set and you're prepared to go? Or do you kind of off the cuff say, all right, there's been a lot of heavy poetry, I'm gonna go funny, right? How do you prep?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between, right? Yeah. Like I have, the poems that I think I'm going to do, right? Like I pick like maybe like 5 poems. I'm like, okay, like these are the ones that I'm gonna prepare for this particular competition. Especially if it's like a one-day thing, because like they're like multiple day tournaments. So like if it's like a one-day thing, like I'll prepare maybe 5 poems, but then I'll add a little bit of flexibility in there where I'm like, okay, well, if I feel like something else is going to work, I try to make sure that that's also somewhat ready to go too. So at any point, like I have about 10 poems that I'm like, okay, these could potentially go up tonight. But I try to cut it down to about 5, just so that like these are like the 5 core ones that I would like to use, and then I have another 5 that I'm like, okay, I may throw these up if something happens in the environment that calls for it. So I know some people have different strategies. Like some people are like, okay, I have these 3 poems. Like the slam is 3 rounds. I have 3 poems. These are the poems I'm gonna do. And that's beneficial because then you go in and that those are the 3 poems, right? But what I noticed is that sometimes something happens where it's like, okay, I have a poem that's exactly like what somebody else did and they just did that poem. And now it's like, okay, do I throw mine up or do I go in a different direction?
Switch it up.
So yes, I try to add a little bit of flexibility in there because it is a game, right? It's a bit of a chess match. Like you see how scores, are coming in, and you see what scores, are doing well. I mean, what poems are doing well, what poems aren't doing well, what subject matters are doing well. And then you try to see what you have, that's as close to that in your arsenal, So yeah, it is a bit of a chess match. It is a bit of a game. But yeah, that's typically how I approach it.
You've had a lot of victories, right? We used to run a 3 for 300 slam. You'd come and take that money all the time. And I was there at both Salta. I was in the audience and sometimes judging. You've had a lot of victories. Tell us a little bit about any fails or any rejections. Like how do you handle and what would you advise a younger poet? What would you tell them about rejection?
Yeah, rejection is just a part of the process. Like there are nights where I do really well in slam. There's some nights where I don't. Even now, like almost 15 years later, like there's still some nights where I go into a slam and I think I'm gonna do well and I think I'm gonna win and I don't. What I really try to do is I try not to beat myself up too much about it. I'm trying to get better at that. I'm not as great at that as I would like to be because I still tend to do it. But what I try to do is not beat myself up about it, but also say, okay, I'll kind of go through the night in my head and say, okay, like what were some things I could have done better? You know, what were some things I could have done differently, right? If my outcomes don't match my expectations, I try to find what's the gap, right? Like, what did I do and what can I do better? And I'm always sort of looking at that, right? But also making sure that I'm still, like I said, not beating myself up about it, but also going into it and thinking, okay, like, how can I improve upon this? You know, so that's what I try to do. You know, I think that's really important.
You wrote, my brain is a revolver. My brain is a revolver with am I good enough in every chamber. So you present very confidently, right? And I think what part of the appeal to Rudy Francisco is that when you're on stage and on mic, you've got this, you know, and that's probably partly your competitive side. Is there a side of you that has stage fright, that worries about getting up there?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Even after all this time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. At every performance, I am a nervous wreck.
Is that right?
Especially before slams. Before slams, I feel like I'm gonna throw up. So I typically will have to like find a corner and just close my eyes for a minute, and then just remind myself that, you know, like I've prepared, you know, I've practiced, and there's nothing else I could do right now in this moment that's going to change my outcomes. All I have to do is go up and do what I prepared, you know.
Is part of a poet's maturity, especially a performing poet, that you, after all these experiences, that doesn't necessarily get easier, but it's familiar territory?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I still get just as nervous, but I also expect to be nervous, which is somehow calming, you know? Like I go into it knowing that I'm gonna be nervous, but knowing that I've prepared and I've done this a million times before, so it's probably gonna be okay.
That's it, man. Lots of time spouting in the car in front of the mirror, just
definitely.
whenever, right? People
in the
think
shower.
you're crazy driving down the road, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm gonna talk to you about books, because you've kind of made a shift to the page quite a bit, and published a number of great books on button poetry through your publishing company. So we'll talk about that in a second, but would you do a poem for us now?
Oh yeah, of course. So this poem that I want to do, I call it my honest poem, and I always tell people it's not that my other poems aren't honest. Well, actually one of my friends pointed it out. He was like, you know, I feel like, he was like, when I come out and I watch you perform, I don't see the Rudy that I know. And I asked him, like, what do you mean by that? And he said, I don't know. He's like, you always seem like you have it all together, you know, like when you're on stage. And all your poems are about, like, you know, social justice and whatnot. He's like, but I don't see like you, like the you that I see when I'm hanging out at your house, you know? And he was like, I would really like you to bring more of that into your work. He was like, because the poet you was cool, but like, he was like, but I'm friends with you because like all of the other things that I see, you know? And he was like, it would be amazing if you presented a more like complete version of yourself to your audience, right? He was like, you pick and choose the parts that you like, and then you present that to your audience. But he was like, I think you should incorporate more of who you are, even the things that you don't like about yourself. So yeah, I chose to write this poem because I felt like he was making a really good point, you know? So yeah, here we go. I was born on July 27th. That makes me a Leo. I don't know what that means. I'm 5'6", I weigh 175 pounds, I don't know how to swim, and I'm a sucker for a girl with a nice smile and clean sneakers. I'm still learning how to whisper. I'm often loud in places where I should be quiet. I'm often quiet in places where I should be loud. I was born feet first, and I've been backwards ever since. I like ginger ale a lot. I've been told that I give really bad hugs. People say that it feels like I'm trying to escape. Sometimes it's because I am. Secretly, I get really nervous every time someone gets close enough to hear me breathe. I have this odd fascination with things like sandcastles and ice sculptures. I assume it's because I usually find myself dedicating time to things that will only last a few moments. I guess that's also why I tend to fall in love with people who will never love me back. I know it sounds crazy, but it's actually much easier than it seems. And to be honest, I think it's safer that way. See, relationships, they often remind me that I'm not afraid of heights or falling, but I'm scared of what's gonna happen the moment that my body hits the ground. I'm clumsy. Yesterday, I tripped over my self-esteem. I landed on my pride, and it shattered like an iPhone with a broken face. Now, I can't even tell who's trying to give me a compliment. I've never been in the military, but I have this purple heart. I got it from beating myself up over things I can't fix. I know this sounds weird, but sometimes I wonder what my bed sheets say about me when I'm not around. I wonder what the curtains would do if they found out about all the things I've done behind their backs. I've got a hamper that's overflowing with really, really, really loud mistakes and a graveyard in my closet. I'm afraid that if I let you see my skeletons, you'll grind my bones into powder and get high on my fault lines. Hi, my name is Rudy. I enjoy frozen yogurt, people watching, and laughing for absolutely no reason at all. But I don't allow myself to cry as often as I need to. I have solar power confidence. I have a battery operated smile. My hobbies include editing my life story, hiding behind metaphors, and trying to convince my shadow that I'm someone worth following. See, I don't know much, but I do know this. I know that heaven is full of music. I know God listens to my heartbeat on his iPod. It reminds him that we still got work to do. Thank you.
A lot of people emulate your poetry, they emulate your style. Has anybody ever done it a little too much?
Yeah, we've had a few occasions where people have like just done my poems and have done them in competitions. And that was a little too much. Like one particular time at the Dallas Poetry Slam, I had just featured there maybe like a week ago or a week before this happened. But like a guy got up and he did my honest poem, right? So they called me and they were like, hey, somebody just like did your poem like in the competition. So we're gonna disqualify him, but yeah, we just wanted you to know that, and so it does happen every now and then. It doesn't happen as often as it used to. It got to the point to where like I would get a phone call every month, but yeah, like it does happen, and I do appreciate it, but I'm just kind of like, you could also just write your own poems, right?
Yeah, that's it, right? So as you teach, and so I'm sure you see this a lot, people want to kind of have that style.
Yeah.
So what would your message be to them about emulating their favorites? Because it's one thing to take it all, that's theft, right? But if you take little bits and pieces, that's craft, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say to a young poet or someone who is sounding a little too much like another poet?
Yeah, I would say a good friend of mine, Javon Johnson, he told me that sounding like someone else is a good place to start, but it's not a great place to end, right? We learn things because we see them. Like we learn how to walk because we see other people walk, we learn how to talk because we hear people, So I think with most things, like we emulate, right? And I think in emulating is an important part of the process, but I think it's really also important when you say, okay, like I like that this person does this particular thing. Like how do I borrow that but also make it my own, right? Because when I first started, I wanted to sound like Shihan. I wanted to sound like Anthony Blackshear. I wanted to sound like Black Ice. There were so many people that I wanted to sound like, and I was like, but there's already a Shihan. There's already an Anthony Blackshear. There's already Black Ice. These people already exist. We don't need another one of them. But there isn't a me yet, right? And I think that's what I often want to tell people is that, like your voice is important. You don't have to be somebody else, to excel at the craft. Like you could just be you. So yeah, that would be my message to them.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about your titles. So your book, you're on the page, right?
Yeah.
And your first title was Getting Stitches. And then title number 2 for the second collection was Scratch. And then it went to No Gravity. And then No Gravity Part 2.
Yeah.
And then Helium. And then I'll Fly Away.
Yeah.
What's next?
Actually, the next project, and I haven't announced this to anybody, is called Excuse Me As I Kiss the Sky.
You're going back to the sky.
Yeah.
All right. So I was just curious. So like it's stitches. This is a wound.
Yeah.
This is about maybe healing. Scratch. Right. Here again.
Yeah.
Maybe in some kind of injury or getting through something. No gravity.
Yeah.
Releasing a bit. Right. Or no gravitas. Not be so serious. Right. And then helium.
Yeah.
Now we're really starting to sort of rise. Right.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the sort of rhythm of the work that's in those collections? And do you think it is important to stay positive?
Well, I think it's important to stay honest, right? And sometimes honesty is positive. Sometimes, you know, it's not. You know, and I feel like the reason why, especially with no gravity and you know helium and I'll Fly Away, so the reason why I titled them like those particular names is because you know I feel like for me writing is a release. Like I feel like for a minute gravity doesn't exist. You know, especially I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Soul, but like there's this moment where they talk about being in the zone, right?
Yeah.
And how it's like this almost like an alternate universe, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really awesome concept of how like, you know, sometimes when we get so immersed in something like the rest of the world doesn't exist, at least like for those moments. And that's what you know, no gravity is, right? Like that's what poetry is for me. Like it's brief moments of defying gravity. You know, and that's what helium allows you to do. Helium allows you to defy gravity, at least for a little bit, you know. I'll Fly Away is actually the name of a gospel hymn, and it's the only song that me and my mom and my dad all like, you know. And it's all about how as bad as things get here, it does get better, you know. So yeah, that's why I called it that.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you for what you've done for San Diego poetry.
Oh,
and
no
I'll
problem.
tell you, you have earned and deserve every bit of your stardom.
Thank you.
And so, good on you, Rudy Francisco.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I want to once again say thank you to everybody behind the camera, Sherwood, Kent, Anthony, thanks for being here and supporting throughout and being an inspiration to Rudy Francisco, man. You beat him in that first round, right? And then, of course, to Misty, Mark Cherry, Joe Meisner here at the downtown public library, the San Diego Public Library. And we have to say thank you to Bill Harding, who without Bill there would be no San Diego Poetry Annual, where so many people have had their first opportunity to publish their work. So Bill, we love you, and come again. That's it for Conversations with the poet, Rudy Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.